Ruth Calloway sat in the leather chair across from Mr. Patterson's desk and stared at the number on the paper in front of her. $0.00. She had been staring at it for approximately 3 minutes, which is a long time to stare at anything without blinking, and her eyes had begun to water in a way that felt like crying but wasn't. Not yet, anyway. The bank manager shifted uncomfortably in his own chair. He had delivered bad news before, but there was something about Ruth Calloway's particular stillness that made him wish he had called in sick. "I'm very sorry," he said again, though he had already said it twice. "We've confirmed the withdrawals were authorized under the power of attorney your son obtained in 2019. All of the funds were transferred to accounts in his name beginning in March of 2023. And the last withdrawal of $47,000 occurred approximately 2 weeks ago." Ruth did not look up from the paper. She was doing mathematics in her head, which was a habit from her 37 years as a school librarian. 37 years of carefully filing things, organizing things, putting things in their proper places. She had started with $16,000 in 1986, the year Frank bought their house. She had added to it every single week since then. $200 here, $300 there. She had forgone the vacations her friends took. She had kept the same 2004 Honda Civic for 18 years. She had packed her lunch in a brown paper bag every working day of her adult life. Egg salad sandwiches, a piece of fruit, a thermos of coffee. She had watched the number grow with the same quiet satisfaction. She had felt shelving books in their proper order. $412,000. 40 years of superintendent's salary and careful arithmetic. A life of small refusals so that she would have something secure for the years when her body would no longer cooperate with the demands of full-time work. She had imagined a small house, maybe in Arizona, somewhere warm in winter, or perhaps just the ability to stay in Billings and help Frank with his projects without worrying about money. She had imagined freedom from the weight of uncertainty. The weight was still there. It had just shifted from future to present. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Mr. Patterson asked, and Ruth understood that he meant, "Is there any possible way this conversation could be over?" She gathered the papers, folded them carefully, placed them in her leather satchel, and stood. Her knees made small sounds when they straightened, the sounds of a body that had spent 71 years moving through the world with increasing protest. "No," she said. "Thank you." She walked out of the bank into an afternoon that was exactly as bright and normal as it had been when she walked in, which felt like a remarkable betrayal by the world. She sat in her 2004 Honda Civic in the parking lot for 40 minutes without turning the key. She watched other customers come and go, carrying their lives in and out through those glass doors. A woman in a business suit hurried past, phone to her ear. An elderly man moved slowly with a walker, his grandson holding his arm. A young couple held hands as they walked to their car. Ruth sat with her hands folded on the steering wheel and tried to imagine what came next, but her mind kept presenting her with the same number, repeated endlessly in her own handwriting across a ledger that no longer existed. She and Frank had met in 1977 at a university library where she worked part-time while finishing her degree in library science. He had been shelving books in the carpentry section, actual construction, not reading, and had gotten hopelessly lost in the Dewey Decimal System. He asked her where the books about joinery were, and she pointed him toward the right section, and then, surprising herself, asked if he wanted her to show him. He said yes, and they talked while she walked him through the shelves, and when he asked her to dinner, she said yes to that too. Their marriage was quiet, which neither of them had anticipated wanting, but both of them discovered they did. Frank was a carpenter. He built decks and kitchen cabinets and once, memorably, a treehouse for Derek when Derek was 7 and still the kind of child who believed his father could build anything. Frank would come home with sawdust in his hair and describe the satisfying geometry of a good joint, the way wood grain told you something about how to cut it. Ruth would listen while cooking dinner and feel the pleasure of someone who had found a person who fit beside them without requiring constant negotiation. They had bought their house in Billings in 1986 for $89,000. Frank had renovated it entirely himself over the course of 7 years, doing the work on weekends and evenings. Ruth would watch him work from the kitchen window and feel grateful in a way she had never been able to articulate, for something she could not precisely name. She knew it wasn't gratitude for the renovated kitchen, though the kitchen was beautiful. It was something about the fact that he was building something, and she was watching, and they were together in that watching and building. Derek was born in 1989. He was a beautiful boy with his father's hands and his mother's serious expression. He came into the world looking skeptical of everything. For the first few years, he seemed to belong to both of them equally. Frank taught him to use tools. Ruth taught him to read. But as he grew older, he began to belong less to them and more to the world. He made friends easily. He wanted things constantly. He had appetites that seemed to Ruth to exceed what life could reasonably provide. When Derek was 11, he asked for a skateboard. When he was 14, he asked for a car. When he was 18, he asked for money for college, and then when that was provided, asked for more. Ruth gave him what she could, and Frank gave him what he thought was wise, and Derek took both and usually wanted more. The slow erosion of their autonomy began when Frank died, though Ruth didn't understand it as erosion until it was complete. Frank had a heart attack in his workshop in 2018, a Tuesday in March, standing at his workbench with a piece of walnut in his hands. He fell forward onto the wood, and the piece fell with him, and neither of them ever moved again. Ruth was at work. Derek found him. After Frank died, Derek moved back into the house to help. Ruth was grateful at first. She was drowning in grief and logistics, and Derek seemed to be the kind of person who could manage logistics. He would bring her tea while she was sitting in Frank's workshop surrounded by half-finished projects she didn't know what to do with. He would sit beside her and not say much, just be there in the way that sometimes suffices. When the paperwork became overwhelming, he offered to help. He suggested that it might be easier if he had power of attorney, just for emergencies, just to make sure everything was handled properly. Ruth signed the document without reading it carefully. Her world had just collapsed. She wasn't thinking about the future or its legal protections. Slowly, Derek had taken over more and more. He paid the bills. He managed the accounts. Ruth, each still grieving, let him. She was tired. She was old. The details of money seemed impossibly complicated, and her son was offering to carry the weight of them. For 2 years, she let him carry them. Then she had received a letter from the bank about a second mortgage she didn't remember taking out, and she had called Derek to ask him about it, and he had not answered his phone for 3 days. When he finally called back, it was from a different number, and his voice had changed. He was angry at her for questioning his management. He said she didn't understand how the world worked. He said he had been trying to help, and this was how she repaid him, with suspicion. He told her she was being paranoid and controlling, and he hung up. She tried to call him back, but the number wouldn't go through. She sat in the bank parking lot for 40 minutes, and when she finally turned the key in the ignition, nothing had changed except that the light was starting to fade. She drove home to the house that Frank had renovated, the house she had paid for with 40 years of careful saving, and when she pulled into the driveway, she saw a notice on the front door, 90 days to find somewhere else to live. The apartment above the laundromat cost $420 a month. It was smaller than any space Ruth had lived in since college. The walls were thin enough that she could hear the machines downstairs at all hours of the night and day, and on Sunday afternoons, she could hear the couple next door arguing about money, which was a special kind of torture. But it was what she could afford on her pension. And it was available immediately, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions about why a 71-year-old woman was suddenly homeless. Ruth filled one suitcase. She tried to pack for her life, but her life no longer fit into a suitcase. She chose the photograph album, the one with pictures of Frank, mostly because Derek had stopped coming to family dinners years ago and there weren't many recent photographs of him. She chose Frank's favorite flannel shirt, which still smelled faintly of his workshop. She chose her library card, which had been renewed continuously since 1974 and still worked, which meant the library still wanted her, even if no one else did. She chose a cardboard box of Frank's things: the watch he wore, his wedding ring, a pocket knife, a compass, some loose receipts from Home Depot, a stub from a movie they had seen together. She chose her good shoes and her work shoes and one pair of pants that still fit. She left everything else. The studio apartment had a single window that faced the parking lot of the laundromat. At night, she could see the reflection of her own face in the glass, and she didn't recognize the expression it wore. An elderly woman with silver white hair, she would think, looking at herself. An elderly woman who packed her own lunches for 37 years and saved her money carefully and believed that hard work and prudence meant something. An elderly woman whose son had stolen her future and replaced it with a view of the laundromat parking lot. She applied for assistance. She sat in offices with younger women who explained her options to her with the kind voice one reserves for the dying. She was eligible for Section 8 housing assistance, they said. She was eligible for food stamps. There were programs for seniors. Ruth had never needed programs before. She had always been the kind of person who provided for herself, and the reversal of this, becoming the recipient of assistance meant for the desperate, felt like a particular kind of death. At the grocery store one afternoon, she stood in the produce section and did mathematics in her head. A head of lettuce was $2.49. She could buy lettuce twice a month. Or she could buy milk, which was nearly $4 a gallon, and milk lasted longer, which meant more drinks for the price but fewer meals. The woman behind her in line was buying steaks and wine and flowers, buying without thinking. Ruth envied her the thoughtlessness. When had Ruth last bought something without calculating its relationship to her remaining life? She was organizing her sparse kitchen one evening in late October when she found the box of Frank's things. She had placed it under the sink, which wasn't really a place for anything, but there was nowhere else for it to go. She pulled it out and sat on her bed and opened it up. The pocket knife, the compass, loose screws, business cards from suppliers he had worked with, old photographs of himself as a younger man, building things, smiling confidently. And at the very bottom, sealed in a manila envelope, with her name written on it in Frank's handwriting. Ruth, it said, just that, in his careful block letters. She opened it with trembling hands. The letter was on lined notebook paper, dated September 14th, 2003. And written in the same careful hand. Ruthie, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I'm sorry. I want you to know, before anything else, that I loved you. I have loved you for every day we knew each other, and I loved you more the day I died than the day we met, if that's when I died. I bought something for you, a place. It's on Harlow Road in the Beartooth Range north of Nye, Montana. The coordinates are 45.1847 north by 110.7823 west. The deed is recorded in Stillwater County under your maiden name, Ruthie Hendricks. It's paid for in full, no mortgage. The paperwork is in a folder in the safe deposit box at Stillwater Bank. Key is in this envelope. I've built a cabin there. I've been building it for 6 years, every weekend when you thought I was fishing. Yeah, I built it because I always knew you might need a place no one could take from you. A place that would still be yours no matter what happened to anything else. Everything you need to live is there. Food in the root cellar, tools, a well with good water, solar panels so you have electricity, instructions for everything in a binder in the kitchen. I hope to God you never need this, but if you're reading this, you do, and I need you to know that you are not without resources. You are not without a home. I'm sorry I kept it secret, but I couldn't tell you. You would have said it was too much or too expensive, or that I should have asked you first, and I knew that one day you might need something you couldn't say no to. I need you to go there. I need you to be okay. Please take care of yourself the way you take care of everyone else. I love you, Frank. Ruth read the letter 3 times. Then she lay back on her bed and held the brass key against her chest and began to cry in a way she hadn't cried since Frank died. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere below her ribs, from some place she had not known, could still feel things. She did not sleep that night. She drove to the county clerk's office in the morning before it opened and waited for them to unlock the doors. She presented Frank's paperwork. The clerk, a woman named Susan with kind eyes, found the deed almost immediately. It was real. The cabin, the land, the 12 acres on Harlow Road, all of it was registered in the name Ruth Calloway. All of it was hers. All of it had been hers for 20 years, and she had never known. She drove north out of Billings on a Friday morning with her one suitcase, Frank's box of things, and a set of directions written in Frank's handwriting. The highway became a 2-lane road. The 2-lane road became gravel. The gravel became dirt. The dirt became barely a track. And the GPS signal in her ancient Honda stopped working about 30 miles in. She pulled over and consulted the written directions. Frank's handwriting listed landmarks. White Boulder on right, Bear Creek confluence, tall pines begin here. She had never been this way before, but Frank was directing her, even dead, even 20 years later. She followed his voice across the landscape. The mountains rose up around her in a way she had never experienced. She had seen the Montana ranges from Billings, had driven to them on vacations, but this was different. This was the inside of the mountains. The world reduced to what was immediately in front of her. The winding road, the tall pines, the immense sky above the tree line. It was October and the light was golden and strange, and Ruth drove slowly, carefully, checking landmarks against Frank's directions. Road narrows, willows on left, don't take the left fork. She was 5 hours from Billings when the road ended. She parked at the edge of a clearing and got out of the car. The cabin was there, nestled among the pines exactly as Frank had described it. A small log structure with a green metal roof and a stone chimney with faint smoke. No, not smoke, surely. But yes, there was smoke, which meant someone had been here recently, which meant she didn't know what it meant. She walked slowly toward the cabin, toward the covered porch with its stacked firewood, toward the brass key in her pocket that Frank had left her 20 years ago. The lock turned smoothly, as if recently oiled. The door opened onto a space that took her breath away. The kitchen was small but perfect. A wood stove, open shelving lined with canned goods and jars, a handmade wooden table with 4 chairs, and on the shelf above the stove, a coffee tin, a binder labeled Ruth's Guide in Frank's handwriting, a bed in the next room with a real quilt, bookshelves, and she recognized the titles immediately. Her favorite authors, the books she read and reread. Had Frank remembered? How had he remembered these details across all these years? She opened the binder with shaking hands. The first page was in Frank's handwriting, dated 2017. Ruthie, everything is ready. The well is at the north corner of the property. It's been tested and the water is clean. The root cellar is beneath the cabin. I'll label everything when I finish canning. The solar panels are on the south roof. There's a battery bank in the shed out back. Instructions for everything are on the pages that follow. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Come home. Frank. Ruth sank into the wooden chair at the wooden table and placed her hands flat on the wood. Frank's wood, built by Frank's hands. She was not a person who believed in miracles. She was not a person who had been given many gifts. But she understood, in that moment, sitting in a cabin in the Montana mountains that her husband had built in secret over 20 years, that she had been given the greatest gift one person could give another. Not money, not security, but the knowledge that someone had seen her, had known her, had built her a future she didn't know existed. She found a mug in the cabinet and used Frank's coffee tin to make coffee on the wood stove. The coffee was terrible, old, stale, but she drank it anyway because Frank had left it there for her. She sat on the porch as the light faded and the mountains became silhouettes, and she allowed herself to begin to believe that she might be okay, that her life, though devastated, was not over, that something could still happen to her, that she was not the zero in the bank account. She was the woman in the cabin. She was the woman Frank had built for. The truck appeared on the 3rd morning. It was old and weathered like the man who climbed out of it. Hank Bergman was 74 years old and looked 74 in the way that only men who have worked outdoors their entire lives look 74. Skin weathered to leather, hands large and scarred, a thick gray beard, eyes that seemed to have seen everything and decided most of it was acceptable. He walked with a slight limp, the result of a logging accident in 1998 that had crushed his left leg badly enough that he'd never walked quite right again. "Frank," he called out, not seeing her at first. Then he saw her on the porch. "Jesus, you're Ruth." "I am," she said. "Frank's dead," Hank said, not unkindly. "Since 2018, Ruth confirmed. Hank nodded. "I've been coming up here every month, every winter, making sure the pipes didn't freeze, running the generator, checking for water damage, stacking wood. Frank paid me for 10 years of it, paid me in advance, 6 months before he died. Never said why." Hank limped up onto the porch. "I'm guessing he had a reason." "He wanted to make sure I had somewhere to live," Ruth said. "Somewhere no one could take from me." Hank looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, which transformed his weathered face into something kind. "That sounds like Frank," he said. "He was always thinking 10 years ahead. Come on, I'll show you how everything works." Over the next week, Hank taught her about the property. He showed her how to maintain the wood stove, how to check the well, how to manage the solar battery system. He showed her the property lines, marked with old blazes on the trees. He showed her a trail that descended through the pines to a creek with good water and good fishing. If she was interested, which she wasn't, but it was nice to know it was there. On his last morning, Hank said, Frank would come up every weekend, always on Sundays. We'd work on the cabin, and he'd tell me about you. Every single time, he'd talk about something you did that week. Ruth made the best chicken pot pie last Sunday. Ruth organized the library system and it got written up in the paper. Ruth fixed the kitchen light fixture and she's 70 years old. He was very proud of you. Ruth felt something break open in her chest. He never said so, she said. He showed it, Hank said. That's what men like us do. We show love by building things, by preparing for the future, by taking care of what matters. He handed her a set of coordinates written on notebook paper. Frank wanted me to give you this. He said there's something else on the property you should find. I don't know what it is, but he was very specific. He wanted you to find it yourself. Ruth followed the coordinates on foot, through the pine forest, across the rocky ground, until she found herself at the edge of a small clearing, bounded by granite outcroppings. And there, hidden between the rocks, was a natural hot spring. The water steamed in the cold air. Frank had lined the bottom with flat rocks to make it safe to stand in. He had even placed towel hooks on the nearby boulders. She soaked in the hot water as the sun rose higher, and she looked at the crazy mountains rising in the distance, and she understood, fully, finally, that Frank had not just built her a cabin. He had built her a life, and it was waiting for her to step into it. That first week in November, Ruth began to learn the property. She read Frank's manual cover to cover, a binder filled with detailed instructions for everything: how to manage the wood stove, how to check the well for contamination, how to monitor the solar system, how to preserve food, how to winterize for the cold months. Frank had thought of everything. In the root cellar, she found canned goods dating back 10 years, vegetables, fruit, beans. She found flour and salt and sugar in sealed containers. She found seeds, vegetable seeds, flower seeds, labeled in Frank's handwriting with planting instructions. She also found a second leather journal, positioned on the bookshelf next to Frank's complete set. There was a note attached to it. For you, Ruthie, so you can tell your story. She opened it. The pages were blank. She placed her own pen on the first page and returned the journal to the shelf. Tomorrow, maybe, not today. She drove to Nye, Montana, the nearest town, population 200, when she needed supplies. The general store was run by a woman named Darlene, who was approximately Ruth's age and asked no questions beyond what was necessary. Ruth bought flour. Darlene mentioned that she had extra eggs if Ruth needed them. Ruth said she'd take a dozen. When she came to pay, Darlene refused the money. "Frank used to buy eggs from me," she said. "I'm guessing you knew him?" "He was my husband," Ruth said. Darlene smiled. "He was a good man. Quiet, but good. You can pay me back whenever." Ruth came back the following week, and the week after that, and by late November, she and Darlene had settled into an arrangement. Ruth bought whatever extra she needed, and they exchanged eggs and news and the kind of mundane companionship that makes life possible. December came early, the snow fell thickly, and Ruth learned to manage the wood stove, to keep the fire going through long, cold nights. She learned to split kindling, not well at first, but with increasing confidence as her shoulders adapted to the work. She learned that her body, which she had always thought of as aging, was stronger than she had believed. She learned that there was something satisfying about physical work that had nothing to do with productivity or achievement. There was only the wood split, the kindling stacked, the fire built. There was only the present moment and the evidence of her effort. On cold evenings, she read Frank's journal. She had started reading one entry per day, like letters from someone who loved her. Each entry was a small window into his mind, what he was thinking about, what he was worried about, what made him happy. From 2003 forward, he had written about her constantly. Ruth laughed today at something the librarian staff did, something about the card catalog system. I hadn't heard her laugh in weeks. I want to build her something that makes her laugh like that every day. Derek asked to borrow money again, 4th time this year. I see what's coming, but I can't say it to Ruth. She loves that boy more than she loves herself. So I'll keep building. I'll build her a place where she can't be hurt by his choices. Finish the north wall today. My hands are bleeding, but the walls are true. Ruth doesn't know about this place. She would say I'm being foolish, but I know her. I know the quiet worry she carries. I know she needs to feel safe. This will be where she's safe. It's done. The cabin is finished. The well works. The solar panels work. The root cellar is stocked. I've thought of everything except how to tell her. How do you tell someone you've built them a future? How do you explain that you spent 6 years building a cabin because you had a bad feeling about the way everything was going? I hope I'm wrong. I hope she never needs this. But if she does, she'll know I was always thinking of her, even when I was terrible at saying it. In January, Derek found her. He drove up the road in a rental car, and Ruth watched from the window as he parked and got out, looking around with the expression of someone appraising property. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner, older. She opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, Derek?" "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. "I've been so worried about you." Something in her recognized this as a performance, but she invited him inside anyway because he was her son, and that meant something, even if it meant less than it used to. He looked around the cabin with the same appraising expression he'd used on the land. "This is nice," he said. "How did you afford this?" "Your father bought it," Ruth said. "Decades ago. The deed is in my maiden name." She could see Derek's mind working. She could see him calculating whether there was something here to get. She watched his face shift when he realized there wasn't. "Mom, about the money," he started. "No," she said. "You don't even know what I was going to say." "Yes, I do. Well, I'm going to tell you what your father told me once, when you were a boy. He said love is not the same as enabling. Love is sometimes saying no." Derek looked angry then. "This is about the money, isn't it? You've never forgiven me." "I forgive you," Ruth said, and she found that she meant it, at least partly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I give you what you took. You made your choices, I'm making mine." He stayed 2 nights. Ruth fed him chicken pot pie. She showed him the cabin, the solar system, the root cellar. She watched him struggle with the fact that his mother had access to resources he couldn't touch, security he couldn't undermine. He asked about the deed. She told him it was secure, and in her name, and would remain in her name. He asked if there was more property. She didn't answer. On his last morning, he tried again. "Come back to Billings with me. The house might not be gone. We might be able to—" "No," she said. "I'm not coming back. My life is here now." He left angry. She watched the rental car disappear down the dirt road and felt sadness, but not the kind of sadness that would change her mind. The kind of sadness that is simply true and accepted and released. By spring, something had shifted in her. Not healed exactly. Grief doesn't heal. But the sharpness of it had dulled, and in its place had grown something else. Competence, belonging, purpose. She started a garden in the clearing in front of the cabin. She planted vegetables, tomatoes, beans, squash, lettuce. She planted flowers, sunflowers, zinnias, marigolds. She kept bees in wooden hives that Frank had left half assembled. She learned to keep them from the library books in the cabin, reading everything she could about how bees thought and moved and created structure. She found herself narrating her life to them, the way Frank had narrated his to Hank. "The lettuce is coming up nicely," she would tell them. "I'm going to make a salad for dinner." Darlene started visiting on Tuesdays. She would bring eggs or butter, and Ruth would give her fresh bread, and they would sit on the porch and not talk much, which seemed like the deepest kind of friendship. The mechanic's daughter had gotten into college on scholarship, and when she came home for the summer, she asked if Ruth would help her with her essays. Ruth set up a table on the porch, and they worked for 3 hours on a Tuesday, and Ruth could feel something shifting inside her. The recognition that she was still useful, that what she knew still mattered. A rancher's wife came to the cabin one afternoon in July. Her name was Margaret, and she asked if she could sit on Ruth's porch and not talk. Ruth said yes, and Margaret sat in silence for 2 hours, and when she left, she came back the next day. Eventually, over weeks, Margaret told her about the divorce, the fear, the loneliness. Ruth mostly listened. That's what librarians do. That's what people do when they care about people. They listen. By August, there was an informal rhythm. Darlene on Tuesdays with eggs and butter. The mechanic's daughter on Thursdays for tutoring. Margaret whenever she needed to sit in silence on the porch. Hank came once a month, though he said it wasn't necessary anymore, that Ruth was doing fine maintaining the property. But he came anyway, and they would sit and drink coffee, and he would tell stories about Frank. Ruth realized one afternoon that she had built a community without trying to. She had simply stopped being willing to be alone, and the world had answered. By the time the first snow fell the second winter, Ruth had transformed. She was thinner, stronger. Her silver hair had grown longer, and she wore it down more often now. Her hands were calloused from work. She moved through the cabin and the property with the confidence of someone who belonged to a place and was belonged to in return. She wrote in her journal every evening. She read Frank's journal every morning. She was becoming a woman she didn't recognize, older, stranger, and somehow more herself than she had ever been. In the spring of her second year, she planted a tree. It was a blue spruce, small when she planted it, and with a long future ahead. She planted it where she could see it from the kitchen window, where Frank's east-facing window let in the morning light he had written about. She tamped down the soil with her hands. She poured water from the well. She stood back and tried to imagine what it would look like in 10 years, 20 years. She tried to imagine who would look at it after she was gone. And then she decided that she didn't need to imagine. She would be here to see it grow. She would be here for the years ahead. The last chapter of her life was not going to be written in a bank office or a studio apartment above a laundromat. It was being written here, in a cabin her husband had built in secret, with the mountains as witness and the morning light as blessing.